exhale all those negative things that we can do nothing to change. And we breathe in the strength of love and hope and beauty. And we breathe out all that is anything other. Breathing in and breathing out. All the while accepting that we are loved and accepted just as we are, right here, right now. Embrace your own sense of being in this place and time, in this precious moment in time. Holding in our hearts all those who we love, those who've gone before us and those who are with us now. And we breathe in the gratitude of love and acceptance and relationship. And we breathe out all that is other. And we love one another in this moment together. Breathing in and breathing out. This is a place in Kairos time where we can come away any time and center ourselves in the knowledge of our love and acceptance. All are welcome here.
So, the 4 stages of faith involve this idea of simplicity, certainty, looking for comfort in what's familiar. I've often heard worship services that's described as people come either for something that unites all of us, that I think all of us are looking for, whatever stage we're at. And I'm not going to really allude to that. I'm not going to really spell that out for you, but I'll allude to it from time to time because I want us to kind of figure out where we are with that one thing that also unites who we are as human beings around the world, regardless of our affinities, regardless of our affiliations, regardless of our religious traditions, regardless of our political aspirations and affinities. There's something that unites all of us. But this idea of simplicity is that we look for some certainty in times, especially in times of conflict. But then maybe when we have children and we're looking for a place that we can raise our children that has some certainty to it, some comfort to it, some positive qualities of culture and community. If you look at where the church is now 22 years after 9/11, it's interesting. Because immediately after 9/11, church attendance increased all across the board. Nobody's surprised there because of what I just said, right? We're looking for certainty. We're looking for answers. We're looking for comfort. But then over the next 15 years, church Christianity especially has seen some of the largest decline in Protestant churches across the board, Baptists as well. About the only churches that have stayed stable are those churches that are non-denominational, which are basically Bible churches. I belonged to one myself back in the 80s and 70s into the early 90s. Well, actually into the mid-80s. I belonged to a Bible church myself. And I understand the appeal there, at least the sort of the superficial appeal. But those are the only churches really remaining stable. Every other church seems to be declining. I don't know how many of you saw a post that my wife posted on Facebook last week, I believe it was, earlier in the week. It's been circulating all around the place. It's called Departure, and it's the why I left the church. And it's a Presbyterian minister at First Presbyterian in Arlington Heights, Illinois. It's an interesting article, and I don't agree with a lot of what he was saying, but I also understand a lot of what he was saying. I myself had served in a local church that was really vitriolic. It was really a difficult, angry church. I served in a number of churches over the early years of my ministry, but I served in one in particular as a senior pastor of the church for about a year or so, and it was a very challenging environment. It was an environment that had been sort of created around dependency and certainty, an older community in a remote part of south of Dallas that really was clinging to sort of a shared identity, if you will. I'll let you figure out what that shared identity was, but it was a very shared identity. So anyone else coming into the community had to sort of share in that identity as well. But a lot of families were coming into that community, young families, and I was appointed to that church, and the person that left the church, well, left it as it was just about to find that sense of who it was, and it was a difficult departure. And then I came on and broke every single stereotype that congregation had. Not because I didn't even open my mouth yet. And I'd already broken a lot of those stereotypes. For one thing, my wife was a minister, and she was in another part of the county. Actually, she was in a different county, serving at a church. All of these things didn't fit with what was supposed to be, what was expected, right? And so it was a conflict. It was challenging. And from the beginning, I found myself intervening and using a lot of the tools I had learned when I was a social worker with drug addicts. I literally was confronting addictive behavior. And it was quite challenging. It was not welcoming at all. And as a pastor, I found myself doing more triage, if you will, than pastoring and speaking to sort of the gospel in a healthy way. I still tried to do that. I still did what I did. But it was a year of really difficult. I understand where I think his name was Alexander. I understand where Reverend Alexander was coming from, or is coming from. As he said, he felt overwhelmed after 10 years of ministry by all of the challenges that faced. Not to mention just the challenges of knowing everyone's story and carrying all those stories yourself. You know stories that others don't know, right? You don't know each other's stories as well, but I have that context of knowing a lot of your stories. Carrying all of that with you, I count it a privilege, at times challenging, but it's definitely a privilege to be a part of this community of stories. The number of you here, there's another 125 or so, 150 or so that have been a part of this community and continue to be part of this community, you know, in that sort of sporadic way that we attend. And I know all of these stories. It's very challenging. But I also count it kind of a blessing because I love stories. But at the same time, it represents something that's happening across the board. There's a sense of inauthenticity that preachers sometimes feel they have to wear. We feel like we have to be careful, or we might offend, or we might upend where someone else is on their faith journey. When I came back into the ministry after 25 years of traveling around the country, that was the one key factor that I could come back in being authentic, was that I wasn't going to hold back on my own authenticity. I was going to raise questions that I'm thinking about, while at the same time trying to be careful. And on occasion, I've seen someone jump up and run out of the room. Not very often, because I think it's pretty obvious when you show up that this is a different reality. But I think we have tried to create that culture that is open. And yet, even still, this idea of simplicity is still deeply within our roots. We still like certainty. We still like to have something we can cling to. We still find ourselves falling back on certain ideas because we're just not sure where else we might go. And so the challenge is sometimes, even when we find ourselves being incredibly progressive, now we're kind of certain that those other people who aren't are wrong. We still look for that certainty. So as we go through this idea of simplicity and moving into complexity, which is where we start to ask all the questions that many of you have been asking over the years, and then we find ourselves into perplexity, which is where Tom is most of the time. And it's not always making sense, and it's not always clear, and yet some things start to connect and other things remain sort of loose-ended. The temptation is to lean back into simplicity, right? The temptation is to fall back on just sort of like being comfortable, finding a context we can anchor in. And then there's that level of harmony, which I think is the most challenging. How do we exist with one another in a place of equanimity and non-judgment where we truly can witness to something that's within all of us that we're all seeking. And that, I think, is the challenge of our faith journey. So before the band gets up here, y'all can go and get ready for your next song. Before the band gets up here to start their song, and I've got something to say towards the end of it, I want to share with you a simple little metaphor. Some of you might remember it. A student once went to his teacher, and he said, I really want to learn what I need to know. I really have been studying and I've been working at this idea of discipline and being a person of deep faith. I really want to know what it is I need to do next. And the teacher said, are you sure? Are you really sure you want to do that? And the student said, absolutely. I'm ready. Teach me. And so he said, well, come in here and sit down. He set a cup in front of him. And he said, are you sure you want to know something? He said, absolutely, I am ready for you to teach me. I've been working at this a long time. I am really there. And so he started to pour tea into the cup. And as he was pouring the tea into the cup, the student noticed that the cup began to overflow. And the master was looking at the student, and the student looked up at the teacher again and said, you need to watch what you're doing. And he continued to pour the tea until now it was all over the table. And finally, he pulled the tea kettle back, and he looked at the student, and the student said, why did you do that? And the master said, before you come to me, you have to decide if you're coming to this moment with an empty cup or a cup that's already full.
In times like these, we need to be strong. We need to carry on. We need to get along, hold on, and right what's wrong. In times like these, we need to find a way to make a better day. Keep my feet on the ground, turning round, help me. Everybody needs someone they can lean on. Everybody needs to lean on someone. Everybody needs someone they can lean on. Everybody needs to lean on someone. In times like these, there's no one not to care. No, there's no one anywhere who doesn't feel it in their hearts. Gotta make a new start, y'all. In times like these, let the world understand. Together, hand in hand, every woman, child, and man, not understand. Everybody needs someone they can lean on. Everybody needs to lean on someone. Everybody needs someone they can lean on. Everybody needs to lean on someone.
So, what's happening is an invitation to see yourself in a new situation. With someone with whom you find differences, with someone with whom you disagree, with someone with whom there is a brokenness between you, or with some group, or with some inner child in yourself. That's always the challenge, is to look for simplicity or to enter into the complexity and perplexity that's really being invited. And that's the hardest thing, because we'd much rather lean on what's familiar. We'd much rather go back to what's simple. This is what the early church faced in its earliest days. This is what our church faces today as people decide, doesn't work, doesn't make sense, I'm out of here. And those who are progressive the same way. We're ready to move into our like-minded groups and point our fingers. We're just as simplistic, even though we might think we're being sophisticated. Our cups are full. I want to share with you a story that I hope you'll take with you as this week begins and you find yourself in different situations and invite yourself into a complex place, into a difficult space, and to see how you might try to make a connection there. Long ago in Ethiopia, there was a woman who had married a widower who had a son. Her joy was great when she went to live in the home of her new husband, for she had longed for a child and longed for a companion. But the child refused her affection, saying, "You are not my real mother." He refused her cooking. He tore the mending that she had done in his clothes. He turned away from her every kindness. After some time, the sorrowing woman decided to seek help of a wise teacher who lived somewhere just outside the village. So she went to the wise teacher and she begged her and said, "Can you make me some kind of potion so that my stepson will love me as I actually love him?" And she said, "I can make you such a potion, but the ingredients are difficult to obtain because you must bring me the whisker of a lion." The woman, she went away in great distress, but she was determined not to give up. So that night she imagined, while her family slept, she imagined what that might involve, and she crept out into the edge of the desert carrying a bowl of meat from her home. She knew that a great lion lived near some rocks a little distance away, and she walked into the night sky as close as she could to where the lion would come out of his lair and would rest and look around for food. And then she walked away, having dropped the meat some distance from that lair and running back into the woods, back down to the village. Every night she drew closer and closer before she would set down the bowl and then flee for home. And every night the lion ate the food that she left there, until finally one night, after many, many weeks, she placed down her bowl and stepped back from it into the edge of the woods, still some distance from the lion, but didn't run away. The lion, knowing the food was there, came out and ate the food, looked up and saw the woman, roared a loud roar, and then went back to eating. After the lion had finished, it turned and it went back into its lair. Until finally, the next day, after many, many weeks, and after reaching that point where she had stepped out of the woods, she began to get closer each time. A few days at a time until it finally came that daring time that she actually set the food down, sat down next to the bowl, and waited. It took a long time before that lion came out. But when the lion finally came out, she stroked its mane as it ate. And she did that for a long time, until many days later, while she was stroking the mane, she reached around and plucked the whisker as the lion ate the food. Then as the lion walked away, she went back into the village. She went back to that wise woman at the edge of the village, and she said, "I've brought what you finally asked of me." And the woman said, "I'd almost forgot that you had come by. What was it you wanted?" And she reminded the old wise woman, "You said you had a potion. Now you needed this ingredient. I brought you the whisker of a lion, a live lion's whisker." And the woman's eyes went wide as she said, "I can't believe it. That's amazing." And then she took the whisker and she set it down on the table. And then she looked at the woman and she said, "You have everything you need." The woman looked at her and said, "I don't understand." The wise woman said, "You have the potion that you need, and it has always been there in your heart. But what was standing in the way was your fear. Once you let go of your fear and your expectation and learn to be patient, you'll find things will get closer and closer until you'll be surprised you're already connected."
Everybody needs something. Everybody needs someone. Everybody has a friend of a friend who knew a friend of a friend who's got a friend of a friend. Everybody needs something. Everybody needs someone. Everybody has a friend of a friend who knew a friend of a friend who's got a friend of a friend. Everybody needs someone. They can lean on. Everybody's gotta lean on someone. Everybody needs someone. They can lean on. Everybody needs to lean on someone.
Nice. So, we come to the end of our service. How do we go about this in the next week? So difficult in these times that we're in to approach things with the same trepidation and openness, if you will, to be present to others. It's the biggest challenge, even those of us who think we're in this place of dancing with perplexity and reveling in our harmony, and at the same time realizing how angry others can make us, or how frustrated we can get with the world around us. We keep falling back to simplicity because it's our deep nature. The practice is to learn to empty the cup and to stand present and maybe approach it more gently from a distance. So that's why we have our benediction that we always have at the end. It's not because we just love the poem. It's because our literal practice is to go into the world in pieces. And it is really hard to do that. So I invite you to do that this week. Let's stand together. I invite you to think of who that person is, who that group is, what that ideology is, what that belief or concept is from your religious traditions that you still cling to, that you have trouble sort of opening up to what's past all of that. I invite you to do that in pieces this week. So do we have it up on the screen? Do we have the benediction? Yes, let's do it together. Go in pieces. Old ideas have been upended. Our faith transcended, amended. And in all the unraveling, we find that we are still traveling together into something larger, of which we are all a part, to invite the confusion, to diffuse the illusion, and find that place of meeting again for the first time. So go in pieces to see and feel and share the world anew. Go in pieces.